Okay, let's have a look at this drawing by Pontormo. It's a great drawing showing this figure in 3 states of motion, and is a particularly good one for us to look at the kind of upper body, the torso, particularly the pelvis and the rib cage and how they relate to one another. So I'm going to do a little draw over just focusing on that. So let's start by kind of trying to identify some of the crucial forms. One thing I do if I'm trying to find a rib cage is to look at this area just below the shoulder blades. So the shoulder blades are kind of about this level on this figure on the left, and just below that you can usually see evidence of the egg-like form of the rib cage. So we've got that in place, and we can follow the spine up to the back of the neck where you'll find the 7th cervical vertebra, and that brings us into the tube form of the neck. But where that vertebra is really the beginning of that tube, and it's kind of like the top of the rib cage, so you can fill it in from there if you like, that rough egg shape, and you're getting a good idea of where the rib cage is. We'll leave the bottom section for now, but we'll just look at the other figures from the same point of view. So this figure in the middle, looking at the bottom of the shoulder blade, again you can see some of that egg shape, and again on this side, and we're going to use the neck as if we can imagine it coming down like this. The bottom of the neck itself is made by the circle of the first pair of ribs, so we can fill in from there again, so something like this. And finally this figure, much the same sort of process. We look for this kind of portion of that egg contour. We can start working from there. It gives us a good kind of approximation. So going back to the figure on the left, a good example of why it's important to understand simple forms is if I make a simplified ribcage kind of over here, and I was basically explaining the form to somebody, I would go about it something like this, and I would say, well, you don't want to think about each individual pair of ribs. Really, you're looking at an egg, but on the back it's going to have like this fluted kind of channel down the middle, so it's going to come around like that, then cut in, then come out, and then around again. So if the light were coming from the left, say, this part of this channel would be in shadow, and then this part would also be in shadow. And likewise you can start to see that a little bit here, the way the light is hitting this part in much the same way. So it's going down, in and out and around again, and that's just to try to get you to imagine or just be aware of the way that these very simple forms that are very deep in the body have such an influence on the surface. Now, before we look at the pelvis, I think there's something really important to do, especially with an artist like this, because it can be tempting when doing anatomical studies sometimes to try to go about it like as if you're an X-ray machine, trying to find the bones underneath, and that is not always what we want to do. We don't want to lose sight of the overall rhythm of the form. And one thing that's really striking about an artist like Pontormo is if you look at these contours, they are so kind of animated, they have a kind of energy, you could almost put arrows on the end of them, and he draws like an animator. So I'm going to go down to the pelvic region and show you what I mean. So we can think of this as a sort of egg-like form first and foremost, rather than trying to find the bones. So there's this kind of tension and flow, the way he brings the eye around and down through these forms. There's a bounce and an energy and a torsion to all of it. And we really want to kind of keep that in mind, otherwise you're going to just end up drawing an imaginary skeleton that's not that useful to you. So once you've got that in place, you can then start looking at the skeleton in a bit more detail, and that will help you read the musculature on top. But in the beginning you really want to get these larger forms in place, and simplifying the pelvic region into some kind of unified form, bone and muscle combined, is a really good way of going about it. So some of you might have come across this idea in tutorials on animation or something like that, where the pelvis and the ribcage are combined together to form a kind of compound shape. So let's take this figure again. You would have something like this. When you bring them together, you've got something like a kidney bean shape, or like a peanut shape. And then we put the neck on top, like a tube, the head on top of that. Once we've got that, we can start thinking about the skeleton in a bit more detail if we want to, but getting this kind of overall shape is what we want to do. So let's have a look at put the shoulder blades on now. So it's going to come around there on that side, something like this on the inside. We're going to have a gap between the pelvis and the rib cage here, which is going to be the external oblique muscle, which is like that. It's very much bulging out on that side, stretched a little more on this side. Just above the split of the buttocks is, you should be able to see the triangle of the sacrum, usually a couple of dimples above there, and this starts to give you the kind of like a butterfly shape of the pelvis, which is a kind of echo of that, the bony form underneath. So as you go through, you start trying to identify forms a little more specifically, and it starts to, the drawing will start to kind of take on a bit more of a human-like quality. But getting those rhythms in place is the key thing, is the most important thing. So let's have a look at the other two figures from this point of view. So this kind of massive, like, backward movement with the head up there, you really want to kind of practice getting this feel, really, and it's a hard one to explain. This is just a matter of practice to get this to work. It is a matter of feel, and the more you do it, the more you can, it'll creep into your work. It's not something you can kind of work on and see a big improvement immediately, but it's a good thing to strive towards, to kind of know, to be aware of that it's an important thing. So you can see as I'm drawing, the lines I'm making are kind of fluid, but they're not, it's not that they're fast, though sometimes people imagine that they are. It's more that they are just moving from A to B in quite a fluid way. You're not doing this kind of what are called chicken scratch lines. You're sort of practicing making these kind of graceful movements. So you can see that kind of kidney bean shape again at work. So it's an interesting extreme view, because in this figure, the figure on the right, you're seeing a real twist. So we're getting the rib cage in almost a perfect profile, but then we're getting the navel coming round and then the pelvis facing this way. And in this kind of case, when you've got something like that you want to show, it can be a good idea to use a box for the pelvis, just so that, well, just, you know, if there's any sort of ambiguity in your drawing that you're not sure if what you've done is clear enough, putting in a box form can really help you to sort of decide and to see what exactly is going on. And I think what I was saying before about gesture and rhythm and movement, to try to get that to function alongside these kind of geometric forms, because quite often when you start thinking about how to simplify form into cylinders and cubes and what have you, they can easily come out very mechanical looking. And I think learning to draw cylinders and so on with a bit of bounce and a bit of life to them is a really kind of important thing to cultivate as well. So let's have a look back at a little more closely at some of these drawings again, just to recap what it is we've been doing. So I'm going to box this pelvis up. So this is the anterior superior iliac spine, and it's usually a couple of fingers distance beneath that the thigh is really going to start. A lot of people make the mistake of bringing it out from the anterior superior iliac spine itself, but you need this kind of crucial little distance. We've got the inguinal ligament, which is the dividing line between the torso and the leg, and then finding a center line up from the pubis here to the navel and then to the sternum. Here's where you see the twist, and it's going into then a side view almost of the pec, and that would be the pit of the neck up here. So we're getting suddenly a little bit of this side of the abdomen coming out, and then here we've got the teardrop form of the external oblique. Let's take a look at the arm up here with this shoulder blade coming out, the cylinder of the arm, and the deltoid coming this way. There's an overlap. And then the armpit, the all-important armpit, I think The reason I say that is because it's like this junction of different forms. So you've got the pecs wanting to go up this way, trying to get to the humerus, the upper part of the bone of the upper arm, and then you've got the teres major and the latissimus dorsi trying to get around to the back of the body. So there's a lot going on. A similar case in this figure. Let's look at the shoulder. We've got a slightly different view. A little bit of chaos going on in the shoulder area here. A little bit, kind of hard to pick out the exact anatomy of it. But I think that's a good lesson too. It's that Pontormo's not really thinking about the exact anatomy. He's kind of internalized it to such a large extent that he can kind of just sort of riff on it, I suppose, and sort of be quite fluid, and he's kind of slurring certain aspects of it, and it will still work, which is what we're kind of striving for, really. We don't want to have to make kind of literal depictions of anatomical form, and I think an artist like this was using that information to compose with, to make this kind of compositional arrangement, not just on the page but within each form as well. So you can think of composition as working like that it's got this kind of overall structure. So look how beautifully these figures are arranged on the page, this kind of motion that he's got. But also within each figure you've got, they have their own internal sort of rhythms. And the thing I really like about this drawing is that, the way this arm's pointing that way, it's coming down, finally to there. There's a kind of real path to that. So here we can see a little bit more detail. This would be the teres major. That's going underneath the arm, trying to get to the front of the arm. The triceps coming here, overlapped by the deltoid. We've got the latissimus dorsi, which would be coming out also from the armpit, but where that's going to end up is coming back down to around here, and then from there you're going to have the external oblique. So that little moment, the way that compresses against there and then pops out again, it's the sort of thing we want to be aware of, so that the drawing can have a dynamism and an energy. And this is true if you're working on a highly finished drawing as much as it is on a kind of quick economical sketch like this, because in a highly finished drawing it's very easy through the process of rendering for things to become kind of wooden and static, and so you're trying to kind of hold on to that first energy that you see. So these are kind of transferable skills, if you like, that can be used in a lot of different contexts. So I'll leave it there. That's hopefully a helpful summary for you about how to approach analysing some of the forms of the upper body.